Welcome to the ZimmCast, a program dedicated to bringing you what's new in agricultural marketing. The ZimmCast is the official podcast of AgWired and hosted by Chuck and Cindy Zimmerman.
Hello and welcome to the ZimmCast. I'm Chuck Zimmerman. In this episode, I have a very special guest. I haven't talked to him recently, but we did quite a bit in the early days of AgWired. He's Harry Siemens, and some of you may have heard of or read his Siemens Says. He just received a very well-deserved award, and we'll talk about that too. So let's get started. I'm visiting with Harry Siemens, who I've talked with many times, and when we started ZimmCom and AgWired.com. Let's start with some of your background in farm news and where you started first here.
Well, I started out on the farm with my father and my brother in a place called Plum Coulee, Manitoba. And my dad already farmed 1,200 acres in 1960. And he was a good farmer. He was, he used chemicals and those kinds of things. So I farmed with him. But then I went back to university and took a couple of years of university. And I had promised my dad I would farm forever in 1967 because we bought some land together. When I came home from university in 1971, my father and I had no inkling. He says there's an advertisement in the local paper for a farm broadcaster at Radio Southern Manitoba. Like I say, I had no inkling. I applied within a month. I was in the studio. And I became a farm broadcaster within the next 8 months. 1972. And that's where I started to travel. I started to think I was somebody, right? But that's how it started for me, radio in 14 years. And, and then I left that. And then sometime later, I did a TV show called the Manitoba Farm Report based on Orion Samuelson's U.S. Farm Report. He had a Samuelson Says, I had a Siemens Says. And so Orion actually came out from Chicago on his nickel to help me promote this show on a talk radio station. And so today I am a freelance farm journalist. I did a lot of public speaking, a lot of seminars across Western Canada, but I'm a writer, a freelance writer. And that's what I'm continuing to do in my 55th year.
So let's see. You helped us host what you called Siemens Says. We put that on AgWired, and actually we were able to, make you a user there where you could post it yourself. For those who may not know, what was Siemens Says?
It was when I started the television show. As I said, I modeled it after the U.S. Farm Report at that time. So I did a Siemens Says. It was a 45-second editorial off the top of my head at the end of the show. And when I finished the TV show in about 1999, I asked a friend who did some work with seeing what people recognized you as. And so am I going to go by Harry Siemens as a freelance writer or Siemens Says? And he did a survey and he says, Harry, they all know you by Siemens Says. Stick with it. And that's what I did. So I still write a monthly column in a local farm paper here in Manitoba and in the Hog Journal or Hog Country. And so I write a column and it's a thought that I have about a current situation in agriculture. Basically, again, and I don't want to, have Orion roll over in his grave, but once again, it was based after what he said because Orion, Max, and Lynn Ketelsen, they were my mentors. And we can get into that just a little bit because I have a really key thing I want to share about that.
You just recently received a significant award, the North American Farm Reporting Excellence Award, and that's in recognition of more than 5 decades of service to ag and ag communications through both Canada and North America. those are the guys that put that together, actually. So tell us a little bit more about it.
In 1978, I was at a point in farm broadcasting where I went to my boss, the general manager, Elmer Hildebrandt, in Altona, Manitoba, at Golden West Radio. And I asked him, I says, how can I get up to that next level? He says, after we talked a bit, he says, there's a guy in Minneapolis you should go see, Maynard Speece. He says he's a WCCO. He says, go see what he would say. Well, I made an appointment with Maynard, had a meeting with him, about 30 minutes. He was quite cordial and to the point. And at the end, I says, Maynard, what can I do to get better? He says, join the National Association of Farm Broadcasters. In 1978, I went to my first conference in Kansas City, and I went every year through 1985, and then I left broadcasting, so I wasn't a member anymore. And so that's where I met Orion first, Max, because and they were the guys that would have me on their TV show time and time and time again. 1980, Max came with his whole crew right here to Altona, Manitoba, and he did a whole series of shows right from Manitoba, about Manitoba. And Lynn Ketelsen, I got to know him as well through the same system. And, that's how I took that next step. And I give so much full credit to Orion, Max, and of course, Lynn Ketelsen, because they were the guys that really recognized me. And the one interesting thing was, in order to get me to speak at the business meeting of the NAFB, they made me chairman of the Canadian Farm Broadcasters Committee. There were only two. But it was really good. I came home. In 1980, I became president of the Canadian Farm Writers Federation here in Canada, and also before that of the Manitoba Farm Broadcasters Association. And I used what I learned there. I used and applied them to our annual meetings. And you know what? The rest they say is history, but I'm still having fun doing. I appear on radio the odd time here in Manitoba and with Lynn, or not Max anymore. He's retired. But so anyway, that's where it all began.
So when it comes back to this award, though, what does that mean to you?
It means in part of what I've already described. It was a total surprise. I stay in touch with Max. I stay in touch with Lynn Ketelsen. And of course, Orion I did until he retired. And it means so much for the simple reason that here are three fellows and an association that really put me up about 10 notches. I had kind of reached what I called a plateau. And when I came back from there, it just opened up the door for me because I remember the first time there was an issue at the border between Canadian and American hog producers. And when I spoke the first time and they found out that there was a Canadian farm broadcaster, I think I had 10 to 12 TV cameras waiting for me outside and outside the door. And so I had the privilege of sharing with them. Orion got me to speak in Chicago at the Who's Who of the Illinois Farmers Network, or whatever it's called. I spoke at the Chicago Board of Trade, and I learned a really important lesson there. Orion wasn't in attendance, but I came there to speak, and so I shared some things. And that time we had the Canadian Wheat Board in Canada, which is now gone. But they asked me different questions. So the one question I come out and I said, and I really didn't know what I was talking about. And so one of the guys stands up. He says, "You can't have it both ways," And it was silence in that room. So I took a moment, a deep breath, and then I apologized to them, and I said exactly that. "I'm sorry, guys. I should not have answered that question because I don't know what I'm talking about." I got an ovation, and I could finish my talk with the no egg on my face. But it was, Orion got me involved in quite a few of those kinds of things.
Well, before we close on this, are there some other things that you've done, instances when you are pretty proud of some of the work you did, or just like what you're doing right now? I mean, it seems like you really look like you're enjoying yourself.
Oh, I love it. I look back and, one of the other real outstanding things was uh, in 2006, Ralph Engel, rural tours, ag tours, working with Lynn Ketelsen. They were coming to Manitoba with 3 busloads of U.S. farmers. And Lynn, of course, we knew each other. He says, Harry, can you help us with some ideas? And well, they already planned it because Rolf is good at that. And so I said, well, I said, sure. I says, uh, I can, you pay my hotel and I'll stay with you guys and we'll travel together and I'll share. But he says, if you really want, I can do the opening speech, the welcoming speech when you get here. So those 3 busloads came, and I moved from bus to bus to bus and shared about Manitoba agriculture. The next year, I get a call from Lynn. Ralph wants you to host your own bus. So at that time, my first wife and I, we were the only Canadians. So they would pick us up at Alexandria, Minnesota, and we'd go for 3 days, 3 nights, 4 days and 3 nights, and I would host a bus. And eventually Lynn stepped back, and for 2006 through 2014, we hosted a tour every year for Ralph Engel and Lynn Ketelsen. And you know what? That really stood out. One of the last tours was when I brought another busload to Manitoba, and I hosted them here. And the other thing is, I did some travel. I went to Europe in 1982, and again, it was as a result, a little bit of a result. I was the president of the Canadian Farm Writers. I had some contacts, and I'd met a lady by the name of Sadie Taylor. She was the public relations person for the British Royal Agricultural Society. And she said, you ever come to Europe? He says, I'll look after you. 3 days I got hosted by the British Information Services in England and Scotland. And they hosted a big dinner for me right in the heart of that. Those kinds of things. And there's all the people like yourself, Chuck. I met you and your wife and met all these great people. If I'm going to say anything, it's the people that I had the privilege of serving and meeting with that my motto has always been a positive mental attitude to encourage and to serve others will motivate me to do my best. So, in wrapping this up, if you want, I simply said my goals were to, as a journalist, to be accurate. Number 2, I was always a farmer's advocate. And number 3, I love to take the agricultural information and adapt it so that the farmers locally could understand it.
Well, I really am glad we had this opportunity, and I'm so happy that these guys got together and created this award, which you definitely deserve. We could talk about all kinds of other little things. I haven't mentioned things like IFAJ, the International Federation of Agricultural
Yeah.
Journalists, that took Cindy and me around the world. Seeing these people in another country really, I think, changes people that just don't understand that really farmers, whether they're in Europe or in the United States, they all got the same kind of problems and successes too, for that matter, right?
A pig is a pig is a pig, no matter where you go. And I've written about hogs for 30 years for the prairie hog country, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to a lady by the name of Lori, who owns that paper and has given me all kinds of opportunities. But you know what? There's people across the country, across the United States. I even have some contact with Europe and other countries. And so, hey, it's been great, but you know what? This is an absolutely privilege to work with you in this fashion.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Harry. And again, congrats for the award here. And that's the ZimmCast. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the ZimmCast, the official podcast of AgWired. Check us out at www.agwired.com to find out what's new in agricultural marketing.